Hello again, and welcome back to the Bonanza Valley and Western Model Railroad. Today I'd like to talk to you about my locomotive roster. Share with you the locomotives that I have on my freelance layout and explain to you why I made the choices I made, where the paint scheme came from, where the decal scheme came from, and how I've been able to, how the real world has influenced the decisions I've made when it comes to selecting locomotives for my model railroad. Now, this is a big topic in the world of model railroading, especially in freelance, because we can't just simply follow the prototype. We have to come up with some believability as to why the railroad, why our freelance railroad has made the decisions it's made. And in my opinion, it adds a lot to the believability of a good freelance model railroad. And you see this played out in many freelance model railroads who you just know it looks and feels right by the time and attention they've put into making these decisions. The Bonanza Valley and Western, as I've shared with you, is an imaginary sister railroad to the Twin Cities and Western and the Red River Valley and Western. So because I chose two existing real railroads to sort of base my decisions on, it made selecting a paint scheme and a lettering scheme very, very easy. The maroon and gold of the Red River Valley and Western, as shown on this picture, absolutely influenced my decision for paint scheme, for lettering scheme. And when I was working with the manufacturer for the decals, it was very simple because he already had existing Red River Valley and Western decals. So he simply had to swap out the RR and replace it with a B. So that was kind of an easy way to plant my freelance railroad's paint scheme into the real world. And it made some of the choices that I would have had to make or dream up when creating my own freelance line. It kind of took some of that legwork out of it. And for me, that was a godsend because I can get too hung up and it's sometimes a little bit too difficult to come up with those ideas yourself, or at least for me it is. So I would encourage you, if you're looking at doing a freelance model railroad, look to the prototypes, look to that backstory. Again, Bonanza Valley and Western is a sister railroad to Twin Cities and Western and the Red River Valley and Western in Minnesota here. So that's a Jeep 38-2. I also had this locomotive custom. It's a Jeep 20, custom painted as well by my good friend Ray Grosser. Did both these before he passed away. Now, selecting other locomotives has been a little bit more fun and almost a little bit more challenging. We are fortunate in Minnesota to have an incredibly neat railroad in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area called the Minnesota Commercial. Go check it out online. Really, really cool. They were a heavy Elko and GE line. As the Bonanza Valley and Western is set in the modern era, and I don't have it specifically set to today, but really the last number of years, the 21st century, certainly in the fictional world of the Bonanza Valley and Western, we've benefited from having a railroad that was shedding its old Elko locomotives over the course of the last 10 to 20 years. So fictitiously, I've been able to take advantage of motive power coming to the Bonanza Valley and Western from the Minnesota Commercial. And as luck would have it, the Twin Cities and Western in the real world interchanges with the Minnesota Commercial. So it all just kind of fits to enhance my story. So the first locomotive to come to the Bonanza Valley and Western from the Minnesota Commercial was number 35. It's a Montreal Locomotive Works engine, formerly Canadian National, and it's an M420 locomotive. I forget exactly the year that Minnesota Commercial pulled it off the roster, mothballed it, but in the Bonanza Valley and Western, in my freelance world, it came over to Bonanza Valley and Western. Not too many years ago, Minnesota Commercial also mothballed, and I believe it's since been scrapped, the 1971, which incidentally, that's the birth year of my wife. So very, very cool. But again, in my story, Minnesota Commercial, the Bonanza Valley Western, picked up the 1971 to add a little muscle to our line here in central Minnesota. And recent history, in fact, Elko RS18U, I believe, was last run on the Minnesota Commercial in 2022. So last year, they have mothballed all remaining Elkos, and 83 was like the last one to go. So guess what? In the fictitious world of my model railroad, guess what? The 83 is now going to be on my roster. And lastly, because again, region has a lot to do with making your model railroad, your freelance model railroad, believable, I've also got a BNSF Jeep 38-2, 1948, great little runner. And it just rounds out my current roster of locomotives. As I mentioned, paint scheme was a big deal. 1998, by the way, is my oldest daughter's birth year, and 2003 is my youngest daughter's birth year. So adding those little touches as well is kind of a fun thing you can do when you have a freelance model railroad. The maroon and gold scheme is also a nice regional nod of the hat to my favorite prototype railroad of all time, the Sioux Line. Their original paint scheme was maroon and gold, and I don't know that that's what the Twin Cities and Western and Red River Valley and Western, or why they chose that as their paint scheme, but it really does a nice job of regionalizing and putting my railroad in a location that is very believable, very realistic. So that's the story of the choices I made, how I've created my story, my roster, more to come. It was fortuitous for me to have a really cool regional short line, the Minnesota Commercial, 2 hours east of here in the Twin Cities, that over the course of the last 20 years has begun to shed some of its older Elko equipment. It adds to my story of how I picked those locomotives, why they are now showing up in rural areas versus plying the railroads in the metropolitan areas of Minneapolis and St. Paul. So it just adds a little bit to the story. Now, I know a lot of freelancers will go ahead and patch over numbers and names and those type of things. I'm not there yet. I might do this BNSF. That might become my first attempt to do a patch over. I don't know that I'll do it to the Minnesota Commercial ones, partly because I love that railroad, and as much as the Bonanza Valley and Western will probably drive my modeling for years to come, I envision a day where I'll get the creative bug to do a different type of model railroad, and I can really see doing an urban railroad based on the Minnesota Commercial. It's highly modelable, if that's a word. So I don't know that I'm going to change the schemes or do any patch overs on my collection of Minnesota Commercial locomotives, but I will likely do a patch over on something like this, or maybe a future locomotive. So lastly, the beauty of doing a freelance model railroad is that you can get a cool combination of EMD, Elko, MLW, which was Montreal Locomotive Works, affiliated with Elko. It gives you the opportunity to make some really cool choices like that. And even though my Bonanza Valley and Western is set in contemporary times, there's that shoestring budget aspect, which is really, really cool when you model a freelance model railroad based on a short line. It gives you the opportunity to expand your horizons, have some unique locomotives, do some creative things that might look a little bit out of place if I was attempting to do a modern prototype railroad such as the CP or the BNSF. So those are the reasons. Those are the little bit of the story behind my choices for the locomotives, the why, the how, the color scheme, etc. So I hope you enjoyed getting to know a little bit more about my locomotive roster and why I made the choices I made. And until next time, happy model railroading, and God bless you. Take care.